I really like writing this historical stuff because it allows me to step outside of myself. Nobody's going to ask me autobiographical questions like, "Are you Greek? Did you learn to paint? Are you were you a model for Johannes Vermeer?" No, they were not going to. I got away from that, and I got away from myself, and I enjoyed the history. It's really hard. The historical stuff is so hard. The research is hard, but I love it because it takes me outside of myself. So The Virgin Blue became half contemporary, half historical, and my ideas for books have been set in the past, fully historical, you might say, ever since. Now, this historical novelist label, though, I've always been a little wary of it. Well, I'm less wary of it now, and it's a good thing because I'm standing here with that there. So yes, I am. But it took me a long time to embrace it. For when I describe my books, the fact that they're set in the past, to me, seems to be not the important bit. Now, I could describe to you some of my books and you'd never know they were historical. So I've just written a couple of descriptions. I'm going to read them to you. A painter and model fall for each other through an aesthetic meeting of the minds. A bored housewife fights for women's rights while the neighborhood kids play in the local graveyard. A girl discovers fossils on the beach and forms a friendship with a woman equally obsessed with fossils. A woman helps runaways despite her in-laws' disapproval. A dysfunctional couple fight over trees, and their son flees family trauma to make a new life in California. Now, that is Girl with a Pearl Earring, Falling Angels, Remarkable Creatures, The Last Runaway, and At the Edge of the Orchard. But all of those plots could take place now. They don't have to take place in the past if you look at them that way. The setting in the past, though, is what makes them unusual. It's what provides the texture, the grit, and also the verisimilitude that makes it easier for the reader to accept the fictional part of it. Because that's really what I do. I take, and probably what you all do too, you take facts, you take fiction, you weave them together. And hopefully nobody sees the seam or the weave in between, so that you can't tell them apart. The facts rub off onto the fiction, making it more believable. The fiction kind of sexes up the facts. It makes them feel more relevant, more interesting. But you could say the same thing about contemporary fiction. A lot of contemporary fiction requires some sort of research as well, something you don't know about. You mean, like Ian McEwan, very famously for Saturday, the novel, tailed a brain surgeon for a couple of years because he didn't know anything about brain surgery, and he found out about it. So there's plenty of research that does need to be done in contemporary fiction as well. But what is it about the past and about history that I prefer? Why do I write that instead of contemporary novels? Well, I said earlier that writing The Virgin Blue, I was better at writing the historical stuff because it was allowing me, like, almost literally to detach myself, to step outside. I'm often asked why I write historical fiction, and I think that's one of the reasons. I want to escape myself. I just don't actually find myself that interesting, and I think that you probably wouldn't either. So I'd rather not write autobiographical fiction. It's all too easy to slip into that when I write in a contemporary setting. Now, there are various ways you can escape when you're writing. You don't have to jump back into the past. You could jump forward into the future to write science fiction. You could write crime fiction where you're writing about crimes that you would never in a million years commit yourself. So there's a lot, you can set books in different countries that you've never been to. So there are a lot of ways to escape yourself. And in fact, genre fiction is often called escapist. And I think sometimes it's not just escapist for the readers, it's actually escapist for the writers too. So one of the reasons is for me to get away from myself. A second reason to write about the past is that, frankly, in a kind of straightforward way, the contemporary world is already overwritten about. Not just in novels, but newspapers, blogs, TV. How can I compete with all of that? It's just, there's so much of it. Plus, you, the readers, are living your novels. You're living your contemporary life. And I can't compete with that either. I don't want to. So I find there's too much competition. And it's easier to step back into the past. But possibly most importantly, the reason I prefer writing about the past is because I think that being interested in the past actually makes us better people. So we're all better people than out there. Just don't tell them that. I think that it makes us more three-dimensional because we stop thinking about ourselves so much. I look at it this way. It's kind of like a model. Okay, when a baby is born, they're like a dot. All they're thinking about is that moment right there. They're hungry, they're wet, they need sleep, they're scared. They're not thinking ahead, they're not thinking back. They're really like living in the moment. And then as children grow, they become more of a line, a little bit more of a line, but they're still pretty much in the present. It's when they're teenagers, they become a little more two-dimensional. They have a past that they can refer back to, but mostly they're thinking of the future. I gotta get the hell out of my family's hair. I'm sick of this place, all that. I know it too well. My son's 17, so he's just waiting, So he's looking ahead. There's a kind of, so you become a two-dimensional person, but you're not three-dimensional yet. When you're three-dimensional is when you start thinking outside of yourself in a tangent. If you start looking more clearly, at first you might look backwards to family history, but then you start looking more towards the history of what happened around your family. And that, it's almost like a triangle. You have the two-dimensional, and then you're out here, and that makes you, brings you into a three-dimensional shape. It makes you more interesting. I think having that interest makes us bigger than ourselves when it takes us outside of ourselves. So I think it makes us less selfish, less self-centered, and a lot more interesting. And I think it makes our writing that too.